They've really, the last year or two, there's some new players on the scene. When I first started, when I put the first farm in the U.S. in, nobody was buying seaweed, fresh seaweed, because there wasn't any. Now there's a bunch of farms, and so people are starting to step into it. My company is a possible buyer. My old company is a possible buyer. There's a new company, Sea Greens, around that's a possible buyer. So there are off-takers now, way more than there used to be. Yeah, the salinity, I'm wondering if the freshwater lens could retard it a little bit. And so you might not want to be in a place with a huge freshwater lens. That's something we really have just run into. The nitrogen, we find it actually goes to an average of about 30 parts per million, quicker than you think about. The really nitrogen impaired areas will run up as high as 50 parts per million. And so one of the things I look for, and nitrogen isn't what's in the DMR testing for pollutants, but it can be an indicator. I work in areas that are shellfish open, which isn't required for seaweed, but it's also a good selling point. The currents, you want a moderate to fairly strong current. If the current's too light, there's still seaweeds you can do, and there's ways you can get around it, like Peter Fisher and Seth's farm over in the Sheepscot. Some of their area isn't as doesn't have as much current, and some of it's probably being shadowed from their other products, and it gets dusty. It gets, I forget what they call it, but it's diatoms on it. But they've actually figured out they found out that by taking a fire hose to it, they're fine. They can put a big pump on it, and they're fine harvesting it still. I like areas where Mother Nature does some of that for me. My newest site that I'm hoping to get this summer, 4-acre site, has it would be on the upper side of the current that you would want. Well, that's the beauty of the farm seaweed with the predation, because you're keeping it up off the bottom. You're not getting any hitchhikers. What does happen is you'll get settlement and recruitment along your headline. Sea urchins, snails. They look like little periwinkles, but there's actually a kelp-eating snail. And what they'll do at their spat, well, it's free-floating phytoplankton, will settle on your lines. But the beauty of it is, if you're putting your line in between August and November and hauling it out by the end of May, they're just getting started, and you'll see when the snails start eating their way down the stipes, and you want to get your product out real quick then, because once they get down on the blades, if the current's too low or in some water areas, you'll have more other kinds of fouling. By the end of the seasons, you'll have bryozoans and several other things that will start growing on there, and site location can make a difference on how bad that fouling is or isn't. But all of the laminarias tend to get fouled as they spore out in the spring and as the critters start growing on them. Alaria, which is the equivalent of wakame. Sugar kelp, which is the Saccharina latissima. And then what I call the ribbon kelp, or the skinny kelp. I call it skinny kelp. That's a variant of sugar kelp that they have just recently figured out is not the same genetic makeup. It was always assumed it was. But right now, the commercial seed available for all of those right now, and all the technology from the farm to the buyer is all right there and available. It would be, you'd want to, you could come to me and say, hey, I need some seed. I'm going to put this much in. And so you would contract with myself. Sarah Redmond is selling organic seed, I believe. And then I think my old company might be selling seed, but I'm not sure on that. And so right now there's 3 labs that I know of that have seed that they're selling. Well, it was originally it was 200 a spool, which was and the spools have 200 feet, and we brought it down now to $1 a spool. But what a lot of people will do is say you want to put some farms in, I might be willing to sell you the seed cheap, or even give you the seed cheap for a commitment of say 70% of your crop at a certain price or something. And so there's a lot of room for latitude there, and I'm not trying to be wishy-washy on this. This is also brand new, that we haven't written any of this in stone yet. We're kind of making it up as we go, and so we've got to make it to where it works for everybody, because if it doesn't work for both sides, it's not worth doing. Right now, I'm telling people, for the sake of argument, just because the biggest buyer, Sea Greens, has seen a lot of variation in farms, once again, like I mentioned earlier, even in Casco Bay in a distance of 2 miles. And so the average gross weight on the lines is 5 to 10 pounds a foot, but that's everything. the hold fast to stipe. They're seeing yields of like 3 to 5 pounds a foot. I think it's going to be a little better than that for a lot of people as they get going, and also when you harvest it, how you harvest it, all that can make a difference. And so at 3 to 5 pounds a foot, let's just go with the difference, go with the 4. On a 400-foot line, that's $1,600, and it costs $500 to $800 to put that in. An LPA is the 400 feet. I actually helped John Lewis and Louise Churchill write the law on that, because when they first put in the LPAs, they didn't include seaweed because there were no seaweed farmers. And so I actually went in and we changed that. And so each LPA, and so you're allowed personally 4. And up to 12, like say with your wife and a child or with 2 friends, you're allowed to manage or tend, one person can tend up to 12. So you can actually, with the LPAs, get a jump start in a way that makes sense, so that while you're waiting for your 4-acre experimental and the longer term 10-year, you can actually build into it and then just keep expanding your equipment. People have played with it a little bit. You don't get, in most cases, you don't get steady enough recruitment, and it's just slower. You know, it's so easy to generate seed and have a real consistent line, and if you're going to go through the expense of having that in the water, it's really nice to have a very consistent growth that you can count on and give you a more reliable finish at the end of the year. Natural set can vary from year to year. It can vary from place to place, and so it can be done. One of the things that got me really going on seaweed was, for years, I live in South Portland, is the boat ramp there. They put the ramps in May. They come out in November after the first good nor'easter, and every year there was this beautiful little crop of kelp on there. And so that was all naturally seeded. And so it can, but it was mixed in with other stuff. It's not nearly as big as the stuff that I farm, that I put in an ideal location. And so if you could find a place where, like they've done with the scallops a little bit, there's places where you can put scallop nets out and they'll catch a lot of spat. And there's other places you can put them out and you won't catch a single one. If you could find a place to put your lines out and collect it and then transplant it to a grow out area, you might be able to develop that technology. But yeah, you start talking, I've had as much as 4 miles of line out in a year before, and to try to generate that amount of seed out of the wild and to have a consistent farm would really be tough. But it could be done. Yes, and that's you start small as the bottom line. Like right now, I sold my 34-foot Weber's Cove, and I'm working out of an 18-foot maritime skiff, and so I know that I can only bring in about 1,000 pounds in that. And I ride it right up on the boat trailer, all the nice coolers already iced, and I take it right to the shop. So there are different ways to move it depending what you're moving it for. You're going to find that these off-takers are going to be setting up more and more gear. I mean, I'll have a barge again. My old company, I designed a barge, and I designed a similar barge for Peter and Seth over in the Sheepscot. And you can take something as simple as a 20 to 24-foot pontoon boat, put 2 davvies on it, and it'll blow your mind how much you can harvest. And then you've got it up here too, where you've got the choice of doing a complete harvest, but at least when it's up here, it's easy to clean it, because the people that are paying $1 a pound, they want clear kelp. They want the, when we buy kelp, we want the good stuff. We don't want the stuff we can't market, because there's no market for it. And so to get a premium for it, you need to bring it in trimmed and in really good shape. And so a very light rig will do that. Even a single davy on a small boat, and you just do less coolers a day if you're only talking LPAs. And once you move up onto a larger scale, well, then you need to think about getting a larger boat. A big Carolina skiff with 2 davvies, you could bring in 4,000 or 5,000 pounds.
So you just haul it up and flake it down?
Yep. Well, no, you want to clear it off the line, and then you want to clear the hold fast off the line, so the line is then ready to go next year again. It's much easier to, it's easier on the kelp and easier on you to harvest it right there out on the ocean.